Let's go for the actual store. Europa Natural
Greetings. Welcome to Europa Natural Law, a roundtable transmission dedicated to healing the madness, the sadness, and the badness plaguing our beautiful, bountiful world. Through regaining our sanity, reclaiming our inherent sovereignty, and honoring our inborn responsibility, we can improve reality. Today, we're talking about the fourth principle of the Hermetica, which is talked about in the KYBALION, which is the principle of polarity. And I've really looked forward to discussing this principle. I think it's one of the ones where it really starts to get interesting, and you can see how you can apply these principles at a deep level. And with me is KRIS Nelson. And KRIS, tell everyone where you're from, where we can find your work. And sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Oscar, and I'm from Denmark.
Hey, yeah, KRIS Nelson, evolveconsciousness.org from Canada.
And yeah, so today it's just us two, and we're gonna start off by trying to define the concept, or like what is meant by polarity, getting our terms defined so that we are that we know what each other means when we're using them. And do you want to start, KRIS?
I guess we could start with the KYBALION. So in chapter 10, it says the summary is: everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites, like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Extremes meet, all truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. And regarding this, so like I mentioned, it was last week on clarification on, I guess it was on good and evil, and had to do with polar opposites. It wasn't that slide, but I'm trying to find it, but I can't find it. Anyway, I'll come back to this. I'll just go back to the KYBALION and what it's stating. So one of the things in there, it says all truths are but half truths. So there's these aphorisms that they associate with plurality. Everything is and isn't. So if you look at my infographic, the first one I have, so yeah, that one, something I called the dualistic conceptual framework that I came up with, and to represent that most things can be represented in this idea of polarity, where you have polar opposites. So there's a dual aspect, and then there's variations in between. There's variability and multiplicity and diversity in existence. And things are not at the polar opposites of one end or the other. Usually they're in the middle along this spectrum. So you can have more of X out of the absolute in one polarity, and less of it, and by contrast, more of the opposite polarity. So something is X, and then it's not X. It's hot, well, then it could be not hot. Or if it's cold, it could be not cold. And so you can play off the oppositions of truth and false, falsity, right and wrong, good and evil, love and fear, light and dark, hot and cold, etc. And here I have one that I made like a year after that, I think in 2015. And so the reason I want to talk about this is because of the aphorisms where they say everything is and isn't. So how can something is and how can something be and not be? Well, it's this. I refer to it as clever rhetoric. This terminology, and I'm not a big fan of it because it's more confusing than being clear. But the way they're talking about is everything is and isn't. So if you look at that infographic, well, something is, and then it's, or it could be, it's if something is hot, well, then it is not cold. So that's how everything is and isn't, because when it has the law of identity and logic, A is not B. So everything has an identity, and when something is that identity, it's not what it isn't. So that's how everything is and isn't, because it represents what it isn't in an apophatic sense when it is something at the same time. So it's not that it is hot and it is cold at the same time, it's that it is hot and it isn't cold. It's not that it is and isn't that thing at the same time, it's that it is that thing,
Yeah,
not
that makes
the other
sense.
thing.
That makes
So
sense.
these
So it's not at the same time,
Yeah,
but
but people
it's in
can
the same
interpret it that
class.
way.
It's like the temperature is cold and also isn't cold, because it can also be hot, but it can't be both at the same time.
Yeah, in terms of temperature, yeah. That's why I
I
don't
like
like
that you
these.
relate it to identity, because that's something that really also helped me, and I think it's a good place that you started, Chris, with talking about being. So here I don't want to use words that well, I'm going to use a word that maybe people aren't really familiar with, which is ontology. So if we're looking at polarity through the lens of ontology, I think it's called ontology, and basically that is like the science of being, of what exists. So if we're looking at that level, which is like the objective, like the foundational level, whether or not something is or isn't, it goes back to that famous question, to be or not to be. And I think that's a really great place to start, is whether something is or isn't. And I think the way that you kind of clarified the bit convoluted saying in this aphorism that everything is and isn't was really cool. That we're not really talking about a contradiction, but that in, for example, a class such as being, you can have both something that is and then you can have something that isn't, but you can't have that same thing be and not be at the same time. So right now we're having this conversation. We're not having this conversation. But having this conversation is a matter of to do it or not, or like is it happening or not. So if we have the choice not to do it, and we can turn it off. So in that way, it is and isn't. It's like there's this polarity happening. And then you can take it, maybe we can take it also after on the next level, which would then be like in logic. And logic, where we have the class of logic, we'll have like whether something is true because it aligns with what is happening, what is existing, or it's false. It's not in alignment with reality, with being. So those two kind of go hand in hand. But first you have the being, or like as you were talking about identity, like the something is what it is. I don't know if I'm being clear here.
Yeah, it goes with the basic aspect of logic, which is non-contradiction. So that's one of the other laws. The law of non-contradiction, the law of excluded middle, and the law of identity. And the three of them work together. So you can't have A being not A. A is A. You can't have A being B. One is one is not two, etc. So that's why when this clever rhetoric, and it's, that's how people buy into a bunch of bullshit, because they they read a book or they hear someone say a thing, and they have trust, and it's all to sound like, ooh, mystical, and ooh, it's so wondrous, and ooh la la. Well, I'm just gonna hop into that belief, whatever's said, and it just sounds so wonderful, and it's so clever. It's paradoxical, so I'm gonna sound clever because it's paradoxical. Like, in a way, I hate this shit because it's bullshit, and people buy into it, and they get their mind fucked and warped into it. So the worst one is all truths are but half truths. And
Is that a half truth?
well, that's why it's nonsense. Just like, truth is not objective. Truth is subjective, or there is no truth. Well, then is what you said true or not true? Well, all truths are but half truths. In some cases, so it blends into the other aphorisms. There every truth is half false. Well, no, it's not every truth. Someone could be saying
Then it's not
something.
truth anymore. That's the first thing I learned in logic is if you have a statement and part of that statement is false, the whole of that statement is false. So no truth can be half true. Like then that means it's entirely true. I would say, but maybe I'm misunderstanding what the meaning is. Sorry for interrupting you. Do you have something
Yeah,
you can help me here?
show on the screen some infographics. I'll help people understand this. So, in the sense that every truth is half false, well, no, that deals with perspectives and how people can have different perspectives on things. So you can say something, but you're speaking about it in a certain context. So it's true from that perspective, that way you're looking at it. There's those. If you have a cylinder, but you look at it from one perspective, it'll have a shadow. It'll look like a circle. But if you look at it from 90 degrees in the other perspective, it looks like a rectangle. So is it a circle? No. Is it a rectangle? No. But when you're looking at it from that perspective, what you're seeing is a circle. In the other perspective, you're seeing a rectangle. So it's true that that's what you're seeing. But the thing you're looking at is neither. It's a cylinder. So if you move around, you can get this, as I show here, 360-degree potential view per axis of rotation. You could have 3 axes of rotation, X, Y, and Z, or, that's the one we're used to in the 3D. And, well, we're limited to that. I don't think anyone can view things in the seven-dimensional view. Anyway, so that's why I say per axis of rotation. And when you're looking at X something, well, you can have degrees of accuracy. Someone can have, of that potential total view of something, understanding something as deeply as we can. Someone can have 50%, someone else can have 75, someone else can have 85 of how much can be understood about that thing. So that's how these aphorisms, I don't like them. I find that they are misrepresentative of an accurate way of understanding things, of getting your mind right and understanding how to think. They do a disservice. So the KYBALION has these limitations of, I guess, the poison pills or something like that, that they put sayings that people interpret literally or in some way, and then they just want to repeat them as if they know what they make sense, as if they understand them and they make sense to them and they know what they mean, but they don't. They're just repeaters of things that
Yeah,
are
I
bullshit
hear you.
because they don't think them
But
through.
I have to compliment you on this slide. I really like the look of it. And yeah, so to bring back the correction here, when we're saying all truths are but half truths, we're not really saying that literally. We're talking about that all perspectives are not the whole truth, and they cannot be because they're perspectives. And that's
only in
where
some
it's
cases,
great when
though.
we come together and we can. It's true that you can really come close. You can actually have knowledge. Which would then be the next level. So you have the ontological polarity, which is being, non-being, the logical polarity, which is false and truth, and then you have the epistemological, or the science of knowledge, where you have knowledge or ignorance. And there is such a thing as having knowledge. It's not everything is. Sorry, but I just wanted to say that there's a point maybe being made that we can kind of get when we're saying all truths are but half truths if we're not taking that literally. And I get why we wouldn't really want to just repeat that. We would want to be more clear in our language. And I like what you're saying that no, it's perspectives that can be not in full alignment, or like not the totality of truth. And I think the meme you were talking about before was something like this, like that there's the shadows and we're seeing the shadows, but really we're not seeing the shape clearly. But really cool slide that you have here. I'm gonna steal this one, that's for sure. Or can I? May I use it? This is what I wanted.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this all truths are but half truths. In many cases, it can be this aspect of perspective. But in some cases, there is no perspective to it. And a statement is absolutely true. And there is no other perspective. I'll give you an example. The principle of self-defense is a right. There are no other perspectives to it. It is a right. And that's all there is to it. So there is no all truths are but half truths. Some truths can be half truths. Some truths can be half false in terms of the perspective of looking at it from another angle. So it's not a circle, it's a square or a triangle, etc. But so that's just an example, because I was on a YouTube video. I think it was on the One Great Work Warriors Open Roundtable, where I mentioned like PASSIO had said, like literally, that physicality is an illusion, and I was saying, well, you know, it's not an illusion, and I talked about this last week too. You know, it's not an illusion, just like a house, just because it's made of wood and plastic and metal and glass. Well, it's not actually a house. It's only wood, metal, plastic, and glass. The house is an illusion. Well, no, the house isn't in the illusion. It's the thing that's constructed with those smaller parts to create a larger construct, just like we are larger constructs, and matter comes into being, and solidity comes into being where it wasn't necessarily solid before, and there was mostly space. So
I think
someone
that
was
ties
like,
kind of into the thing where we want to make really short, like mottos, or like we want to make
yeah, and that's the problem,
these
because
short
it's
sentences.
just
Saying
bullshit.
there's an illusion, but really, if it had to be a true statement, it would have to be a bit longer sentence. Something maybe like the conclusion that one might make about matter, that it is unmoving, and that it is only like that it's standing still. That would be a false conclusion, which would not work as well as like these three words: matter is illusion. You know, so I'm always kind of trying to, and I'm glad that you're bringing this up in this conversation. I'm always trying to be aware that these short sentences, or like the cliches, or like the mottos, they can be true, but they can also be false, and it's easy not to detect the falsehood of it, because it sounds good, or like there's the simplicity aspect to it, but simplicity doesn't have to be retarded.
And the simplicity is, you know, truth is complex. Truth can be simple. A simple thing can be true, but the overall truth, like, this is what I went into in my consciousness and truth presentation from 10 years ago, that, well, truth is a synonym. So you have two types of truth. You have a particular truth, and then you have an overall grouping order truth, and that would be truth as everything. So truth is a synonym for all, universe, existence, reality. So that truth is everything together, like the truth. And then there's a truth of something in particular. So that's where things can get a bit confusing for people. I don't remember why I was bringing this up or what you just said, but it's related to the all truths or half truths, and people like these short things. Oh yeah, the truth is simple. It's a truth can be simple when you're learning a particular truth, but overall, the if you look at all truth, that's everything together. Well, that sure as hell ain't simple. That's everything in the universe. That's very complex. And when you start tying together a particular truth and how it relates to another particular truth, 10, 20, 30, and how they all intermesh, and you're trying to join them all together and conceptualize it all at once, that gets very complex because you're dealing with many parts. The more parts you add to something, the more complex it is. So a particular truth can be very simple, but when you add more truths together, it gets more complex. So truth,
which doesn't have to be a mess. It can be beautiful.
yes, but you have to conceptualize and integrate all those pieces together. So when you're in that process, it gets complicated.
Then it feels
can
like
get
a
confusing
mess in the process. Yeah.
So
I want
truth
to
can
go
be
back
simple.
to the definitions, Chris. I want us to really, because even though this might be a complex topic, I want whoever's watching to be able to be able to, if they're asked what is polarity, what is the principle of polarity, I want them to be able to answer that. And I think it's okay for us to take our time before exploring it further. But like, what is polarity? And I'd like also to give a definition on it. I think it's as you said, it's like the relationship between opposites, but that cannot be true at the same time. Like they cannot take place at the same time. So a relationship between you can say also maybe extremes, but I like the word opposites because it kind of
well, they are extremes.
And
it's a synonym. Like if you have a pole and you have one end and the other end, well, they're at extremes. They're at opposites. So it's if you're saying extremes, well, you can use opposites, and it means the same thing.
And then that it cannot be. They cannot both. If we're talking about the same class, let's say, let's take it the level higher. So we talked about also that when you align your perception with truth, then you can have knowledge. So that was the polarity of knowledge and ignorance. And then let's take one level higher, and we can go into the ethical arena. So in the class of morality, something can either be moral or immoral, and it cannot be like an action cannot be moral and immoral simultaneously. That does not mean that action cannot be moral and immoral. It can be both, but not at the same time. Like you can't act in a way that's gonna, and when I say you, I mean any individual capable of free will, right? And I kind of lost my train of thought. I'm trying to define polarity. So it's this relationship between opposites where both are possible, but not at the same. But they can't be like they can't take place at the same place at the same time.
Yeah, and they can't be present in like a particular substance. If we go by like the categorizations of Aristotle, that type of thinking, then that metaphysics, then if you have a particular substance, then that can't have, like what you're saying, it can't be both one extreme and the other extreme at the same time. It's got to have a certain state at the particular moment in time, and then as time progresses, well, then it can represent something else, but at a fixed position in time, then it's going to be one thing and not another thing, hence the law of identity. And my other slide here was what I talked about last week. So I have duality and polarity represent the same type of thing, from duo, meaning dual is twofold dichotomy, quality of being two parts, acting as a counterpart. It's a classification into two subclasses or opposing parts, a duality. And a polarity is polar, pertaining to poles, the end of an axis, related to a wheel to roll around or turn around. So one pole and two polar opposite ends. So duality and polarity are very much connected because they deal with opposites. So that's what I mentioned here. Duality is part of polarity. Duality can be two things and not opposed as a polarity. Polarity is two things that are opposite. Viewed as a pole itself as the medium, the poles are opposed, but part of the same medium. South-north, one magnetic field, but two poles which are divided. So there you go. I have my pole there that I designed, and then you have one pole, but it's representing a duality. It's representing a polarity because at one pole, you have polar end 1, polar end 2, and so that's what we're talking about. This is what polarity is. When we're talking about polarity, you can always visualize a pole, and one extreme is on one end, the other extreme is on the other end, but we're talking about the same thing. Hence, when I think it's in here, yeah, it's later on in the chapter, talk about hot and cold, and as you mentioned, temperature. We're talking about the same, categorization. We're categorizing it in this concept of temperature, and in that concept of temperature, we have like absolute cold. I think minus 270 something Kelvin or Celsius. I forget what it is, but so that's absolute cold, and then absolute hot. I don't know what that goes up to, but so those are the two ranges of the poles and this polarity of the medium we're talking about of temperature. And then things, as I mentioned in my first slide, well, they're found in that spectrum, in that scale, in various degrees between the absolute of cold and the absolute of hot. So whenever we're talking about polarity, that's what we're talking about. Two things that get positioned as opposites, one apart from the other. And then, well, we can talk about things in between those two opposites that can share qualities of one and qualities of the other. So like 0 degrees, that's when freezing happens, but things can still get colder. And at 1 degree, well, melting can start to happen slowly. So there's more heat than at 0. And that's what one of the other, I think it was the second picture, is how things are relative. So 0 is cold, yes, and 1 is still cold, 1 degree Celsius I'm talking about, but 1 is hotter than the 0, which is cold, but both of them are still cold. It's just one is more cold and the other one is more hot. So depending on the perspective you want to take in order to use a certain descriptor like hot or the descriptor of cold, well, you can reference one thing in relation to the other, in relation to that descriptor. So 0 and 1 degrees, and you're going to talk about cold. Well, cold is more cold, 0 is more cold than 1. And if you're talking about hot, well, then you're going to say 1 is more hot than cold. So again, this deals with perspective. When you're dealing with the polarities and the in-betweens, depends on which polarity you're going to reference something within that scale from. And then once you choose the polarity, well, then you can reference that thing that you're trying to describe as more or less of the polarity on the left, or more or less of the polarity on the right. And then if people have their terms defined and they understand the vantage point, the perspective that someone is speaking about something, then they can understand how they're referencing either aspect of the polarity that they're talking about. Because if I say one is hot, they'll be like, well, no, 1's not hot. Oh, what I mean is 1 is hotter than 0 or something. 1 is hotter than minus 10. And it just depends which way you want to look at it.
I have a question because I was reading this chapter here in the group reading with some others, and we were talking about the class of temperature. How good of an analogy is it when we're talking about things that are either or, where we're talking about either something is in that polar, like in that on that side, or either it's on the other side. And what I'm hearing you say, and what I also feel like the author of the KYBALION was saying, is that it's a matter of degree, it's a matter of perspective, like in the sense of hot is just in relationship to a certain standard, like a certain like 1 is more hot than 0, but that doesn't mean that it's hot in the sense that it couldn't be hotter. Like if your standard is 10, then it would be less than that. So then we're saying, well, then it's relative, right? But
Well, it's relative to
how good of
us.
an analogy
Because for
is it
us,
when we're
hot, would you say one is hot for you? No, you'd say it's cold, because it is. When we feel it, we feel cold, and then we start to shiver, and we can't just go outside for 24 hours in 1 degree weather and think we're going to be fine. We'll get hypothermia. So relative to a human being, we can all pretty much agree how we interpret the feeling of temperature, because for us the temperature has an effect on us. But maybe use smooth and hard or something like that, or soft and hard. If you use soft and hard, then that can be more subjective, because it's not, you can say this is hard and soft, and some people might have preferences for more firm mattresses, and some people might have preferences for softer mattresses, and someone would say, well, that's too hard, and someone could say, well, I don't find that very hard, I find it has some degree of give. And so it depends, like, I don't know, where you're targeting, how someone perceives something. And even with temperature, like you say, well, 20 is hot. Well, no, 20 is getting cold for me. And so for the person, but we can all agree that 30 degrees Celsius is hot. No one's going to say that that's cool, or that
But
minus 40
my
degrees.
question is, when it comes to things like
Good and evil.
good and evil, for example, where we're talking about whether something is moral or immoral, yes, there are degrees, but are we saying that there's a gray zone, that is just a matter of your perspective, or is there a threshold? Is there, even though it can be difficult to distinguish between whether something is that or the other, like one polarity or the other pole, are we saying that there is no, like, no threshold, or is there something, like, is there a difference between black and white? Is it black and white with some things?
Well,
Which
it
is,
is, because so we could go with the 7 violations, right? The 7 violations of property rights. Well, all those things are immoral, but one is more immoral than the other. That's more immoral than the other. That's more immoral than the other. That's more immoral than the other. And then by contrast, well, one is less immoral than the other, which is less immoral than the other, which is less immoral than the other. But they're all immoral. So it depends. Are you relating them to the absolute truth of them being immoral? Well, then each one is immoral. Or are you relating them relative to each other, in which case one can be more immoral or more evil than the other, and one can be more good than the other, in terms of looking at the immoralities. So if something's less evil, well, it's more good, even though it's not actually good in that relative perspective of looking at from one to the other. We could look at murder versus lying. Well, which one's more evil, murder or lying? I'm pretty sure everyone would be able to interpret this correctly, which is that lying is less evil than murder. So relative to murder, lying is more good than murder. Both of them are not good, but relative to each other, you can apply the polarity of the opposite end in reference from one to the other. And this is what I went into in this presentation. I think it's on truth and duality, and the other one, reality processing. And I went into it in consciousness and truth. So that's what that first slide that I had shown. This is how you can interpret things in terms of being relative to each other, or absolute relative to the truth. So here, more of X, less of X. So in those yellow points, you could put the 7 property violations. So if you're looking at it one relative to the other, well, the one on the right is going to be more towards the good relative to the one beside it, which is on the left, which is more towards the evil. So again, it involves perspective and where you're going to look at one thing relative to another, and where it's positioned on that spectrum, on that scale, on that medium that represents 2 polarities.
Okay, okay, so it's like you're saying it's the nearness or the proximity, like how close is it to one of the poles? Because
Yeah.
I like the perspective, which is that there is a threshold that is what I'll call it, like that even though there are degrees, then there is like no gray area between one or the other. This is like a slide from one of Jaina ESP's pieces or videos called Philosophical Notes for Natural Law Teachers that she published 5 years ago. And I like it because it's talking again about logic and the law of excluded middle. And not that I would claim to be very knowledgeable on this, but I think that it's a simple simple principle, and maybe I'm not getting it, but something about, and maybe it's just like self-explanatory for people, I don't know, but that we're excluding the middle between whether something is its identity and what it isn't. So there's like the law of non-contradiction again. So they're all kind of saying a similar thing. So the law of identity being something is what it is, and the law of non-contradiction is something isn't what it is not. And that sounds maybe a bit silly, but it makes sense. Yes, this computer is not a lamp. Its identity is, okay, I'm really bad with examples, please forget my example. But then the law of excluded middle is it's not like that it can be something between there's like a gray area between what it is and what it isn't. And I think this slide kind of shows that really well. So that's like an action, if we're talking about morality, an action can be a wrongdoing. So let's take one of the examples you used before, like lying. Lying will be closer to the threshold, like it will be more far from evil than rape and murder, which will be more close to the extreme, to the absolute evil. But that doesn't mean that it's not evil, because it's still on that threshold. And if I'm hearing you correctly, KRIS, you're saying that it's still a matter of perspective, in the sense that we're talking about what is it closer to? Is it closer to the extreme of evil, or closer to the extreme of good? And because it's closer to the extreme of evil, then we can call it evil. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think so, sort of. So maybe I'll try to simplify it. So in terms of an absolute, Passio says there are absolute truths, and that's true. I gave one before. Self-defense is a right. That principle is true. There is no half-truth about it. So it's absolute. It's an absolute truth. So in terms of good and evil, those are absolutes at either end. And like you mentioned, a threshold. Well, what is the threshold? Well, that's the inherent initiation of harm in a behavior. So that's when the threshold begins for it to be qualified into the categorization of something that is evil. And I'll add another slide here. Where is it? And this is from my True Freedom Natural Law, the Science of Morality, Part 3 on True Freedom. I'm just trying to find it.
But it's not this one we're sharing right now. But yeah, I'm hearing you kind of say that there is a threshold then, because it's and that threshold will be, is an action an initiation of harm, and that's a case of, is it or is it not? It's a polarity. It's black and white.
Yeah, in terms of, that's what I was trying to say, that in terms of the absolute, so the absolute would be either end of the polarity. So that's what I have in the top line here. So the absolute is, so you could look at absolute hot or absolute cold. or the absolute of what would be good, which is the complete absence of evil, or the absolute of evil is the complete absence of good. So that's apart from the argument of whether that's ever attainable. These are what we're using conceptually when we create a dualistic conceptual framework. There's these dualities, these poles. There's a pole, and on each end there's a polarity. So on one end there's X, and then on the other end there's the minus that X, and you could reverse it. So whichever way you want to look at it. And when you're looking at things within those boundaries of the two absolutes, you can then apply that relativity between them, which is the more nuanced of, as you were saying, is it closer to the good or is it closer to the evil? But always within that first application of being more able to categorize and define it with that threshold. So you have to have your definitions need to be more accurate. So the threshold, as I mentioned, would be the inherent initiation of harm. And if you're doing that, then you know that you have gone into that threshold, that it applies to the side of evil. And yeah, if you want to say something, I'm going to really try to find this infographic that I'm having the damnedest
Sure,
time trying
I'll
to find.
share a small video that I think is really cool. This
Oh, I
one
got it.
here. Okay, but I'll still share this thing. It's like 30 seconds. Whoa, check this out, yo. It's
The
the
Mandelbrot, yeah.
but it's black and white because we're talking about polarity. Whoop, whoop. This is where you get like the trance
That's
music.
more, it's not really polar, that's more correspondence.
True, but it's black and white. Come on, you gotta come
Okay.
in. Like, it's a really short one, but okay. I'm glad you found your slide. I'm gonna bring it up.
And here we'll be able to more visually represent what we're talking about, as opposed to the other infographic was more general. You know, it was more general X and minus X and the absolutes and the relative. Here we'll understand what I'm saying. So true freedom, right? So this is an absolute on one side. Why is it an absolute? Because it is the absence of the initiation of harm. So here's the degrees of enslavement, where so the threshold is here, right? When you go away from true freedom, you can still have freedoms, but you've been degraded from some freedoms. So here's the more freedoms, and here's less freedoms. And on the other end of the absolute, so this would be X relative to my other infographic, and this would be minus X. So the X is where you have absolute freedom, and the minus X is where you have no freedoms. So this is a representation of that other thing, but related to freedoms. So right now we're living in here where we have degrees of enslavement. And if we have no enslavement, then we're in true freedom. So when we have the initiation of violence, the initiation of harm, then true freedom is no longer the state that we're living in. And that's because we entered that threshold, as you're mentioning. And that one way of conceptualizing this is the threshold was entered where we entered into that polarity of going towards the opposite of the polarity, which is no freedoms. And in between, you'll still have some freedoms. You could have less, or you could have more. You could have more enslavement, which is less freedom, or less enslavement, which is more freedom, while still not being in true freedom. So we entered that threshold of the initiation of harm, and it's persisted, and then we live in persistent slavery with persistent injustices continually created, and then we can increase in physical severity rather than the covert, which is mostly what we're living in, and then we can end up in more the overt, which was more prevalent in the past. So this is a representation of that absolute and the relative, because between each you could have lying, and then you could have murder on the other end, and well, murder is closer towards getting to that realm of it has less freedoms. It's more severe in the degree of the enslavement, the false claim of ownership that you're applying to someone, and it's the greatest level of harm you can initiate against someone, versus the lesser harm, which means it's relative to the other, it's more good, in quotes. It's not actually good because you're still in that threshold of not being in the true good, the true freedom. So you've entered into that threshold. So relative to the absolute, you're not in the absolute, and you're in that relative spectrum where you can compare things one to the other and say that, well, this is more good than that, and this is worse than that one. But it doesn't mean that these ones here are actually good. It doesn't mean that they represent freedom or what's right. So I hope that
Yeah,
gives more
let's keep this
explanation.
slide here, because this is really where this principle ties into something that I think might be the motivation for most teachers of this information to teach it, because ultimately this principle, the principle of polarity, is the principle that determines whether or not we are free. And as you say, in a society, as soon as any wrongdoing is introduced, that society as a whole is not free. It's not in alignment with the absolute freedom that it could potentially be in alignment with. Just like in logic 101, if you introduce falsehood into a statement, that statement as a whole is untrue, is false, even though it can have a lot of good things. So this is where we'll hear people say, well, democracy is more free than North Korea, so we're free, right? Or like, so we can see, like, people will say, well, it's relative, and like this is the best thing we have so far, and so we shouldn't complain or something like that. But
Yeah,
when you understand that really we could be in alignment with, like, as our society could be moved, could, like, this condition of unfreedom, of slavery, which it is by not being in alignment with the absolute freedom that it could be. This condition can be transmuted, can gradually move more and more towards freedom. But the paradox here is not really that we have to add. It's not addition. It's not addition that's gonna change the result of the equation. It's subtraction. We need to subtract the wrongdoing in order for us to come there. And now we're starting to sound utopic and naive, right? Now we're starting to sound like some hippies that smoked a bit too many joints. Because come on, this is the real world. Grow up. But that's the thing. We need to grow up. We need to spiritually grow up and stop doing wrongdoing. Stop tolerating wrongdoing. Stop normalizing it, supporting it. And that's the way we move towards that that absolute freedom, which is a possibility. But again, this is the big picture, like this, and I love this slide. I'm so glad that you found it, and ultimately this is where it really is like, it's deep knowledge, and it's like, holy if you understand this, then you really can contribute to the freedom and the freedom from the shackles from slavery of our species. But it's all, you can also take it down on smaller levels, of course, in your own consciousness and in your own community. And so, but on a large scale, this slide here that you're sharing is, it really does encapsulate the something that the political spectrum doesn't really, because that's kind of like a false polarity. And so that's also something I'd like to kind of go into a bit at some point. Maybe now is the right time, because you hear people say you can transcend polarity, and that's really incredibly different than transmuting polarity. So I thought it would be a good idea to get those definitions in order. Let me see if I can find. Yes, okay. First definition coming up. Here we go. Transmutation. So trans is Latin for across, and mutare or mutare is to change. So if you put those two together, you have to change across, or that something moves beyond, that something is not beyond, but it's like you could see, like, across the scale, if we're going back to your slide, you could see that it's like you're moving from one pole to the other. You're muting across that scale, if you will. Does that make sense?
The well, it says to change in form, nature, or substance.
Well, I disagree with that. I don't
Yeah,
think we're talking
yeah.
about the nature, because again, that's one of the maxims that is true in the beginning, when we're saying that opposites are identical in nature. So we're not trying to change the nature of something. That would be to try to transcend it. But we cannot transcend it because it's law. But we can move, we can gradually, by degree, move, like increase its vibration, like, or decrease the, like, one end of the pole. So it's like if I have a shirt and I want to dry that shirt, I can't make that shirt into pants. That doesn't make sense. But I can change the wetness by hanging it up to dry. But if I'm never gonna have a dry shirt if I keep pouring water on it. So yeah,
I think
if
you're
that's
not trying hard enough.
observation you had, that in the definition it says to change nature, but maybe then I found a bad definition there.
We can look at it. Yeah, I guess in the definitions, it's maybe more too precise, and we use it more in a colorful, symbolic way, like in transmuting our base nature into a higher nature. Transmuting lead or bronze into silver and then into gold represents our inner qualities, remaking ourselves as a phoenix, burned in the fires, purified, and then reborn. So these are more symbolic things. So I guess there's a difference between the symbolic aspect and then the literal meaning of the word in this case.
Good point.
Because the bronze isn't silver, which isn't gold. So those are different natures. But, the symbolism is to change it from a lower to a middle to the higher. And maybe that's what you're getting at. Something like that.
Then there's this other word which is very similar in the phonetics and how it sounds, but it does mean something else. Because if you look at trans, again, it means across, if you look at the etymology of it. But then skandere or scendere means to climb. So that's what we're saying. When we're saying to transcend something, we're saying to move beyond it. We're kind of saying that we're freeing ourselves from it. We're no longer bound to it in a way. We've transcended it. And this is something I really wanted to touch upon in this conversation, because it's something that you'll hear people say, you got to transcend duality, you got to transcend polarity. And that
Well, what does
sounds
that even
really
mean?
cool. It sounds cool, but what does that mean? And what that means is that you can be free from polarity, which you cannot. It's a law. Things have poles, and you're never going to escape that. So trying to transcend polarity is an impossibility. But it is possible to transcend false polarity. And a good example of that is the political spectrum, is politics, that we're being polarized. Another example of that is men versus women. That's not a real polarity. It's not either or, in the sense that like one, it's one or the other, in the sense that one should be on top of the other or something like that. And or like one is the right gender. Just like
it is a polarity
there's no
in
political
terms
party
of,
that is the right political party. So
but it
we
is
can
a
transcend those
polarity.
false polarities. Sorry, what are you saying?
Well, it is a real polarity.
What is a real polarity?
Well, gender, men and women, male and female.
Okay, I'd like you to clarify what you mean, please.
Well, I was just throwing a stick in your spoke wheel, or your bicycle running along.
Okay, well then I'll try
Look,
to
the law of
rectify.
identity, whatever is. Well, male is male,
Yes.
male is not female. The law of
Yes.
non-contradiction. Nothing can both be and not be. Well, the male is not the female. Everything must either be or not be. A male is a male is not a male. A male is not a female is not a male.
So I was being messy and not articulated enough in my language. So thank you, because that is true. Our biological gender is one thing. The manufactured gender war between the sexes is what I was referring to as a false polarity. That is not a real war we need to engage in. It's something we can transcend. We don't need to go to see it in that perspective, that either it's all women who are horrible and they're just, you know, the devil or something like that, or all men are just terrible and they're just lousy, and you know, who should be like this. That kind of mentality that can be transcended. But of course, biological gender is not what I'm referring to here. And a little foreshadowing, that is one of the principles that is talked about in the KYBALION, the principle of gender, which we have not yet covered. So look forward to that. I hope people who are watching feel as though that it's clear what we're talking about when we're talking about polarity. And I'm glad that we also touched about this, like the difference between transmuting and transcending. And so what my point here is to say we can transcend those things which are not true because they are false, and transcending those means coming into knowledge, coming into understanding, and living with wisdom. But we cannot transcend the truth. There is no such thing as being free from that which is real, that which is law. But thank you for throwing a stick in my wheel. It's always good to be more clear in language.
Yeah, precision of terms helps for clarity. So there was just to make you be more specific. It was the war, yeah.
And also what I'm doing here is something I know you love, which is the apophatic method, where I'm defining what something is by saying what it is not. So I was kind of distinguishing my point from another point, which might look like, oh, now you're just talking about something else, but it can actually help create clarity about what it is we're talking about. To say we're not talking about all these other things. So we're not talking about gender when we're talking about polarity. We're not talking about the thing that where you have the both that complement each other. Like we're not talking about the balance between two things that can exist at the same time. And that's something that I feel is something we should also talk about, KRIS, is how there's a perception of the cosmos or of the universe where people see it as though half of the universe is good and half of the universe is bad, and that's the balance. There's like a good dragon and a bad dragon. They're fighting each other all the time, and that's just the way of things. And there will never be any time in the history of the universe where we can be fully free from evil, because there will always be the dark side of the universe. And that's something that I thought would be good to address this conception. And I don't know what it's called. It probably has a name, but I don't know the name of it.
I'm not too familiar with. There's half of it is good, half of it is bad. I don't know what that is.
It's like a cartoonish, like very, like maybe like a mythological, or like a, you know, it's a worldview of like that in order for good to exist, there has to be evil. So
we talked
like,
about that last time, right?
Did we?
I think so.
Okay, you have to forgive me. I don't remember, but let's talk about it again.
Because in the vibration, we were talking about polarity too. That's why there was the question in the chat where I explained.
That's true. You did clarify that. You did clarify. I just
Yeah.
thought repetition is gold, you know? So
Okay, sure. Yeah.
I think what is important to understand is that they don't really complement each other. It's not like somewhere right now someone is stealing something and that's just how it has to be. It cannot be any other way for someone elsewhere to give someone something. Like that's not balance. That's if people believe that it's balance, that's like a warped worldview, and it's also kind of, I think it's related to this, like, because people will often not be clear in their language and will say light and darkness, and light and darkness is used as an analogy for more than just good and evil, or truth and falsehood, or knowledge and ignorance. It's not only used for that, it's also used to describe gender. And gender is not the same as polarity, because gender is not the relationship between opposites as much as it's like the
Hey,
relationship.
Param has been waiting for a while, he says. You muted yourself.
Hey, thanks for joining. This is Param, everyone. Please introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, and where people can find your work.
All right. I'm Param. I live in France, but I'm Dutch, whatever. And you can't find my stuff, any of my stuff yet. I'll try to work on that. But I've been listening to you, and I'm enjoying. And it's hard to do to separate all these principles. And I mean, you've been trying. You've been doing good. The polarity. It's really interesting. I think a good way to make sure we're still in the polarity principle is to make sure we could define, but the common nature of the two extremes, the presence or the absence of the same principle. It's easy with light. Okay, le principe lumineux, the light energy is present, totally present, like a bright light, and total darkness, like would be the complete absence of light, which is obvious anyway. What other one is like silence and noise? Okay, and then there's le principe sonore, and then there's le principe calorique. You know, the heat energy. Okay, it's either present or so it gets difficult, a little murky when you try to define what is total freedom and total slavery. What's the common denominator? Denominator? The common denominator. You get what I mean?
Denominator.
Denominator. Yeah. And I reflect on the 10 expressions of natural law. Even there, it's kind of hard to. Ignorance and knowledge. Okay, well, it's maybe the absence or the presence of total absence or total presence of truth, probably. I'm just having a look at the 10 principles. Confusion and sovereignty, chaos and order. Yeah, I'm just thinking at the top of my head here. I'll give you back the. Je vous redonne la parole.
I love what you're saying about that. It's like a matter of absence or presence, because that's something for me that was really a great way also to kind of visualize what is a solution when we're talking about problems. And I think a cool way to visualize a solution is it's the presence of what we desire, whereas the problem is the absence of the solution, which sounds really like duh, but again, it is related to this principle of polarity. To bring back the slide that KRIS made, we have this we have the presence of true freedom and the absence of true freedom as soon as wrongdoing is introduced.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I accidentally muted you. Sorry.
Okay. So is it like, okay, because I see this little increasing physical severity. Is that the common denominator?
I don't think that is the denominator. I think
Okay.
you could maybe call the denominator freedom, because then we're talking about the presence of it or the absence of it. But maybe that's not satisfactory. You want something that is like a word that is neither freedom or slavery? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe like the societal condition. I don't know. I'm just brainstorming here. I don't know.
So am I. KRIS, it's your slide. Find one. What's another word? Like total slavery and total freedom. What's the common denominator? What makes it that common denominator, that the total absence of it or presence of it would lead to total freedom or total slavery? It's just a question. I'm not trying to corner you. It's just.
Sorry, I was responding to my partner who's in shopping at a store. Well, if you're talking about the extreme ends of the spectrum, first you have to conceptualize it and see if it's even possible. So when you're talking about total evil, what would that even look like? Where you would be, the only thing I could think of is where you have no more free will, because all of these things are violations of free will ultimately, as what you choose to do with your property. And when someone chooses for you, well, you're not consenting. So their will is deciding what is done with your property. So it could be your life. You could take your own life, and that's your choice because it's your property, but someone can't take your life. And if we look at the most extreme version, so to be an absolute evil, we could conceptualize a time where maybe there's neural links, and instead of mind influence as mind control, there is literal mind control, where you are in your body, but you are no longer controlling anything about your body. You are, in sci-fi or TV shows or movies or something, where there's this concept of being like a passenger in your own body, and there's another consciousness overriding it. So that's that's what I could see as the purest form of evil, where you no longer have free will, you have no ownership. The only thing you have is your awareness, but you can't do anything with it. And so all of your property is gone because it's been taken from you, because your natural right of your consciousness and will, which is in a body, and you have self-ownership because it's your body, well, that is taken away from you, because then your body is no longer controlled by you. The neural link or the chip or whatever is doing the controlling. So in that sense, you're talking about a denominator, and like in this thing we've already talked about, it's that threshold, the inherent initiation of harm is that thing where we're dividing all of our behavior by, is how we're going to characterize it and define it in order to be able to place it within the spectrum. How can you know where you are? Well, the denominator is what type of behavior, and the type of behavior is that behavior initiating harm? So the type of behavior, is it an immoral behavior? or is it not an immoral behavior? Hence, it's not inherently initiating harm. And then if all of that is removed, like the apophatic way, negation, removing that, and everyone is only engaging in behaviors they have a right to do, then what we have is true freedom. I don't know if that answers what you're looking for.
Spot on. I mean, the short answer was free will. I think that's a really good. I mean, it should be on that graph. Free will.
But I'm thinking you're asking also, because I'm seeing a thing you wrote before, which is that a real polarity is probably when one can define what is more or less present. So yeah, I think that's a really good answer. And sorry to interrupt, but yeah, so say that free will is more present, or free will is less present, is more absent.
Yeah, I remember Mark PASSIO defining, what was it again? Yeah, when is slavery about? When you pay 60% taxes, 50, at what amount is it no longer slavery? And he says even 1% is still slavery. So it overlaps what KRIS was saying. Of course, when it infringes on your property and your money, whatever, and then again, it's the idea of as soon as you're not doing something voluntarily, well then you're in slavery. Yeah.
As soon as something is being imposed on you as a violation of your right to freely choose all possible behaviors, because what we're doing now is voluntary. Overall, everyone is choosing, making the choice to accept the persistent violations of our rights. And that's the world we're living in. Hence, we're not living in true freedom, we're living in a degree of enslavement. And that is a choice we're all making. And if we chose differently and we said no, and then we acted on that and united together to put a stop to it, then it wouldn't be happening. But that's not what we're doing, because most people are choosing to accept our enslavement. So it's not necessarily choice, because the rest of us who don't, we're not going to, you could choose to, okay, I'm not going to accept it anymore. And if anyone tries to violate my rights, well, I'm going to engage in self-defense. Well, you'll be put out of existence quite quickly. So there's a pragmatic approach of, this is why the great work is so important, because if you want to keep existing and potentially create true freedom, it's not to just stand in your rights in an absolute sense. And if the violators come for you because you didn't pay your taxes, then they try to arrest you. Well, then you're going to engage in self-defense. And then they're going to view that as an assault on them, even though they're assaulting you. They think they have the right, and then they're just going to murder you, and then you'll be out of existence. So if everyone did that, we would get nowhere, because their forces are stronger than those of us who are individual and scattered. And so there's this need to unite, and that requires numbers. So hence what I call the principle of quantity, or the majority. We have to have more numbers on our side and united to act against the large numbers of even those physically doing the enforcement, but there's also behind them is everyone else in society who supports them and supports what they do and supports the government, and are completely mind controlled and brainwashed into thinking what is a right is a wrong, and that the wrongs others do are actually rights, that the wrongs that authorities do are rights. So we have all this, the battle is in the mind and consciousness and in knowledge and understanding, and then we can get to wisdom overall as an aggregate of people.
So we're all individually movers. Like every individual is a mover of that polarity of the grand scale, like the one that you were showing before this one here, that like where both are possible. We can go full on North Korea style, or we can go anarchy, no rulers, but still obeying natural law, obeying the golden rule, respecting each other's rights, and so on. So both are possibilities, and it's not like that it's going from one side to the other automatically. Like the poles are mutually transmutable, you could say. Like we can go from less freedoms to more freedoms, and just as we can go the other way, we can go from more freedoms to less freedoms by adding more wrongdoing to it. So the reason I'm adding this slide here is to say, well, here's how we're individually contributing to that, and it's through polarity. So you see that there's 3 rows, and the first row is a descriptive row, and the 2 other rows are the polarity. So you have the positive and the negative expression. And this is how natural law expresses itself, is through polarity. And as you were saying, KRIS, it's all about us having knowledge so that we can then move on with our understanding and proper wisdom to create good. So you see that there's the arrows there going down, and it's not like you can go from knowledge to confusion. Like knowledge will lead to that inner understanding and rulership, and you're defending your rights. You're using you're exercising the right of self-defense and aligning yourself with that principle, as well as aligning yourself with the principle of non-aggression, because that will then lead to more freedoms on the scale. So there's like, these are 2 illustrations that are kind of saying some, like, they're touching on some very similar things. This one is more specific, whereas this one you can apply maybe in more contexts, even though like there's still the same point being made. And yes, so again, you can look at it again as like, you can look at the first level. You'll have the generation, which is like another word for creation. Like, what are you using to create? What is your the place you're coming from? Are you coming from a place where you want to expand your consciousness and learn about reality, which is objectively, independently of one's perception? So is an individual expanding their consciousness to learn about that? And as we were saying before, KRIS and I, that can be kind of messy, like that process. Like it can feel confusing, but that's because you're aggregating a lot of information and you still haven't maybe put the pieces together, right? That would be like the third step. So if you use love, where here we're talking about the expansion of consciousness, and then you aggregate enough data from different sources without prejudging it, you're able to accept truth because you're putting the pieces together. You're able to take it in, is another way of saying it. And that's also the truth about natural law, the truth about this principle of polarity, the truth about your own rights, for example, the right of self-defense. And then when you're internalizing that, when you're integrating that, that's where it gets really like, that's where you're bringing it into reality. It's no longer just an idea. You're starting to be able to bring this ideal or this truth into matter, and then you can act with that wisdom, and you can respect other people's rights, other beings' rights. And there's a quote actually about that, how like that specific process, when you're integrating that knowledge by an individual, I think it was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, like an author from Russia or Soviet Union, who I think survived the concentration camps. He has this quote, which is that the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, not between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts, This line shifts inside us, it oscillates with the years, and even within hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained. And the way I interpret that is that even a person who has done a lot of wrongdoing can still change the way that they behave. Like they can change the way they come from. Instead of coming from confusion and trying to control and creating evil and chaos, they can shift, they can transmute their that polarity of morality. And that was it.
Another riddle to you. So, talking about this. Could you put thanks. So between sovereignty and confusion, okay, fear and love, and the common denominator is, I would say, is probably consciousness here, huh? The lack of, or the more presence of knowledge would be truth, the common denominator between ignorance and knowledge. What would be sovereignty and confusion? I mean, I'm just I want to be more outspoken about it.
Maybe rulership, like internal rulership. No, because that would yeah. Sorry, I feel like I'm not as good at finding the common denominator as you are. I'll think about it before just answering.
Okay, Chris, your turn.
What is more present when one is sovereign, and what is less present when one is in internal bondage? I'm just asking the question again. I don't know if I have the answer, man. But I have a meme. I got a meme. Do you even transmute, bro? In all seriousness, no, I think it's a good question. What is the common denominator?
Yeah, between sovereignty and confusion. Clarity.
Maybe morality? Or understanding, maybe? No, I don't know.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. Or chaos and order. Because control and freedom, we decided it was free will.
Yeah, and there we're also talking about the action. So that makes sense that it's free will. So it still has to be some internal aspect, right? It has to be something happening at the emotional.
I agree. It's
what
still
would
internal.
It be?
Yeah. Insight. It's like understanding. Insight. And it's still inside.
Well, I'm thinking the way you get to sovereignty is through a lot of work, a lot of courage, and a lot of there's that processing aspect of it. Like if you're looking at the trivium method, there's the logic, right? There's that second step of refining your understanding. And what is I think that is the element, but I don't know if I can find a word for it, but maybe
logic, discernment. I mean, it could be many words, but
yeah, but I feel like it's something that you gain. It's something you develop, right? I don't feel like it's just something, oh, this is just something you're born with necessarily. I feel like it's, even though maybe I'm wrong, maybe it is that simple. I want to say that now we've talked maybe for a bit a bit over an hour, or an hour and 24 minutes, and I think it's a good time to address some of the questions. I see there's at least one question in the comment section. Do you want to repeat the question while KRIS is here before we move to the reading the comments? Did you catch the question, KRIS, which was that what is the common denominator between sovereignty and confusion, that polarity?
So this chart, I find it's a bit too simplistic. I have my own version in the works. So you can't see. Anyways, yeah. So the proper corollary to confusion would be understanding. And I have this in other infographics from 10, 11 years ago related to. I'm all fuzzy now. And my camera. Boo camera. Anyways. Because you have knowledge. What's the corollary to knowledge? Ignorance, a lack of knowledge. Confusion is a lack of understanding. So the corollary is understanding. And if you were to look at sovereignty and the corollary for sovereignty, I would say it would be, so sovereignty is, just as a word, it's above rule. So you're not being ruled is the implication. And to not be ruled in that state of love, if you're on the polarity of love, well then, if you're not being ruled, then you also have to you have to respect others' sovereignty as well. So the sovereignty would represent that sovereignty is acknowledged for all, not just for yourself, but for all. Because you took in that knowledge of moral truth and you understood it. And then you developed the understanding of sovereignty based on objective morality being understood, on moral truth being understood. So the corollary on the side of fear would be that instead of sovereignty being acknowledged for all, that sovereignty is rejected for all. So this could be where you only acknowledge sovereignty for yourself or for certain others, but not for all. So that would be the fear side. And that, and in a one word to use, like sovereignty on the side of love, or on the side of fear, you could use domination or corruption, I think. Because if you're not accepting sovereignty for all, and you're only claiming that you yourself have sovereignty or certain others have sovereignty, then you're corrupted. Your state of being is a corrupted state of being, and you're engaging in that aspect of domination. So that those could be singular words. There could probably be other words to correlate with sovereignty as a single word, but I've looked at it as confusion being before that, correlated with understanding, and then you get sovereignty, and and then its opposite, which is rejecting sovereignty for others. And then, well, you get wrong action, folly, or right action, wisdom, and that leads to slavery and control, because that's what domination is. You're going to dominate others, and that's going to bring a form of control or slavery. And that's wrong action, folly, foolishness, creates chaos in the end. Or if you're engaging in right action, respecting the sovereignty of all, then you're going to create true freedom, justice, good, and order.
Oscar also came up with the word understanding, and I agree, but actually the opposite of confusion is understanding, and actually sovereignty could be the common denominator. I don't know if you get the.
Oh, I like
that.
Yeah. Anyway, I think
we're getting somewhere.
We go to the
questions.
Yeah. I'll pull up a comment here. This is by Lena. She's writing, KYBALION put love and hate as opposites and courage and fear as opposites. It didn't put love and fear as opposites. What is your take on this? Well, I mean, maybe it's a bit like a semantic thing, like love and hate is like the cliche, right? Is like what people usually think of as like opposites. And but I think that kind of speaks to what people view love as. They're seeing like you really like someone or you really don't like someone. If you hate them, you really don't like them, right? But what if hate actually can be an expression of love? What if you can hate something with love because you love truth and freedom, therefore you hate lying, and you hate slavery, like the wrongdoing. That's actually love. Do you kind of see what I'm getting at? Does that make sense?
I realized. I mean, somebody told me. I think it's pretty true. It's you can only hate somebody that you first have loved. You can't hate like a total stranger. I mean, hate is like a really investment. It's like focusing a lot of energy in someone you already entertained a relationship with. I think. Fear is like, and also fear and love are also kind of a tricky combination. Of course, if you say love, people would say the opposite would be hate. But as for consciousness, the expression, or I mean the emotion that shuts it down is hate more than is fear. Sorry, more than fear. More than hate. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up here. Anyway, I find it interesting that you can only really, because there's an emotional attachment to somebody, you can only hate them as much as you've been disappointed. I think. In a relationship or in a friends, you're like, oh, you betrayed me, so now I'm going to really turn all my hate on you. I don't know. It's just a question out there.
Well, that is a point that it makes the book, and Helena was there at the group reading, so she's referring to a passage where it's using love and hate as an example of polarity, where it says that you can transmute that, like you can, someone that you, as you're saying, someone that you've loved, that love can turn into hate, and vice versa. The other part of the question is courage and fear as opposites, which is something that the KYBALION also does, and I think that one does really make a lot of sense, and maybe that's more close to, I think, what is a tendency of meaning when the word love and fear are used by natural law teachers. We're often talking about that leap of faith, of having that trust, having the courage to consider, is there actually such a thing as objective truth, and wanting to seek that. But it's still not really completely the same thing, because we also probably would want to use courage in the realm of or motivation for our actions. So we have the courage to do something, and fear in that regard would be maybe more cowardice. So we would put maybe that as a polarity.
The one thing regarding the question is you have to make two distinctive comparisons, as the KYBALION was not using the word love in the way that Mark Passio was. So you're talking about love as two different things. So they're not comparable. So when the KYBALION, as you mentioned, was comparing love and fear, it was in a certain perspective. And the way Passio uses it isn't as an emotion of liking something or disliking it as hate. So they're not really comparable as a, so while the KYBALION says it's love and hate, and the chart is love and fear, well, it's because they're talking about two different things. So that's why they're both valid in that perspective you're looking at them, because they don't refer to the same quality in each instance.
And then we have, I think this is Darren. Darren is asking, what do you think about the idea of transcending polarity by being centered in natural law? That way, we're not stuck in a binary dynamic I think that's I mean, yeah, I'm trying to maybe simplify it a bit, but I can read the whole thing, but I think I'll have an answer at this first, if that's okay. Which is that polarity is the binary relationship, and we are stuck in that until we understand how to work with it. We can never be free from it being in effect. There will always be a binary relationship between opposites, because, and maybe I'm not using the word binary correctly, but like there will always be an either or relationship, because you cannot have opposites the same place at the same time. That would be an impossibility. That would be a contradiction, because again, opposites are identical in nature. And how can something be its identity is, and at the same time be what its non-identity, or like its opposite, or like what it's what it's, yeah, I'm kind of, but what we can transcend is false polarity, and often the principle of gender, like feminine and masculine, that will be presented as a polarity, even though it's not a polarity. And that's something we can transcend, because it is a balance. It's a both. It's not a binary relationship. It's a relationship of and both. So you can have, that's where like that meme that what's it called? KRIS made a slide earlier, showed a slide in the beginning, which was like a version of this meme here, where you can kind of see like there's different perspectives on things, and it's like both are true, like the different perspectives are true. It's like an and both relationship there. It's not an either or. That's my take on it. What do you guys say?
Yeah, well, transcend, I don't know, could have more clarity, because I think we're not too clear exactly what they're trying to get at. So you have an inherent tripolarity with balance equilibrium in the middle. So on one side is -1, so we'll say immoral. On the other side is 1, moral. And in the middle is what? I don't know. Need more example, more explanation. Because in some things you can reference it that way and apply numbers with, for example, dark care, apathy, and light care. So on one side you can have light care, on the other side you can have dark care, and in the middle you can have apathy, which is no care of either kind. So you can apply a positive and negative aspect of care, and then the complete absence of it. So that's one way of looking at the dynamic of care, and serving the light, serving the dark, or neither, and just not caring at all. And in terms of good and evil, if we try to apply the same mechanism, I don't think it works, where you'd have good and evil, and then the absence of good and evil. Like, what would that represent? See, I don't think it's too applicable. So you can have this trinary, or whatever, however they termed it. You can have it for certain things that you're trying to compare, and you can have some situations where there's like a midpoint or a middle point between the two opposites. And in other cases, you can't really formalize a conceptual framework where you can have a 0 point of either. I could try with like behavior. So you could have, it's a different way of categorizing it, but the true categorization is anything that's not immoral is moral, morality level 1. So I went into this in my Natural Law Science of Morality Part 4 morality presentation. So if you look at anything that's immoral, it's because it's violence, it's initiating harm. And if you're not doing that, then it's moral. But within the morality, you have what's morally neutral. I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to lift my hand. I'm going to put my hand like this. I'm going to raise one finger. Well, that's has nothing to do with good, but it's morally neutral. So in that sense, you could look at that as 0. And then the good is when you're working to end evil, you're either working to end the suffering for all, or working to alleviate the suffering of an individual, doing something good for them, doing a positive benefit to them. You can view that as good. So that's morally beneficial to them. And there's things that are morally neutral, and then there are things that are morally detrimental, hence the 7 property violations, which are immorality. So you can look at it that way. I don't know how to term it in terms of like good and evil. I don't think it works, but if you term it in terms of moral, morally beneficial, morally detrimental, and then morally neutral, that could work as this triple framework or whatever, triple position within the framework.
Yeah,
And
Chris, to
it
your
looks like he's
yeah.
he's agreeing with you. He's saying as well that he sees freedom as the rest state. So like you were saying, that like it's the 0, and that we can work towards that. And he's saying we can work towards that by removing the obstacles to that.
Yeah, well, freedom is the default, because if no one engages in any behavior towards any other, then what you have is true freedom. And as soon as you engage in behavior that's making a false claim of ownership, which is making unrightful claims of the ownership of others' property, then you're engaging in immorality, which is violence, and that's introducing the dynamic of enslavement. And if that persists, then you create a condition of enslavement that goes on until that condition ceases. So yes, the default is freedom, and then that has to be destroyed. So that's why we're never creating. I don't use the term creating freedom anymore. I say we're restoring, or we're bringing back freedom, because we're removing
Cool.
the
I like
negative.
that. I like
Because
that.
the freedom is the default. As I said, if no one does anything to initiate harm, then what you have is freedom. So, this is an interesting position, in the KYBALION, talking about polarity. And what is the thing that exists? Is it light or is it dark? What is the thing that exists? Cold or hot? Well, the backdrop, the default is the cold, and you have to create light. The backdrop, the default is darkness, and you have to create light. So PASSIO talked about this in his earlier podcast. So the thing that actually exists, you can look at it from this perspective, is the light, because that's something that's being created. And it's the absence of that light or the introduction of it. And the same with the hot. It's the introduction of the heat or the absence of it. But in terms of morality, it's the opposite. The default isn't the negative polarity. It's the positive polarity is the default, which is freedom. And you have to introduce the negative polarity to take away from that other polarity of the positive. I just wanted to mention that.
Very
Sorry for
interesting.
cutting you off before, but and now I'm doing it again. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, very interesting. It just reminded me of a martial art teacher I had, and he says the world is made out of paradoxes. Oh, so maybe he meant it could be polarities or duality, or in a way, yeah, of opposites and paradoxicals. And the whole thing is to embrace that fact, but just make that just make that fact a friendly aspect of your life instead of Well, what's the opposite of friendly? Yeah, well, struggle. Just make it friendly to yourself. It seems a little off point, but left from right, he could move. He'd embrace the idea of this. Okay, I'm facing you, but I could in a very instant, the very same instant, I could face the back of myself. He could literally fall and rise up again, just by turning around, just by overcoming the paradox of falling, but the same energy that makes him fall, he turns it around and makes him rise up again. Okay, it's like a little subtle here, but just to your point, it's very important that you made that clear about that love is not just this emotional love between people. I think we discussed agape or different types of love, philos, and everything. And I think it's very important for the audience to understand that this love we're talking about is really this fertile ground for the field of thought. Once you're in that state of I think PASSIO says the flowering expression of consciousness that enables the reception and the reception. What do we receive? What we receive truth. Just to your point, to add up to your point that what we're talking about. Back to the other question about love. Merci. Next question.
That was actually it. I have some, because now you mentioned martial art teacher. That reminded me of this. It might not seem that related. But for me, it reminded me of it. That because we were speaking about it the other day at the group reading when we were reading this chapter on the KYBALION, and that was regarding instant gratification. And I thought, in a way, that was a good point that came up in that conversation that I'd like to bring up here again. The woman who was talking about it, her name is Natalie, and she was saying she doesn't really believe that there is such a thing as instant gratification. Like it's like that, not necessarily. Maybe I'm not saying it correctly, but she's saying like that's not the way to change, like to manifest or like to create the change we want, because things like that transmutation, it's like a matter of degree of gradually getting there. And I feel like if we go back to that spectrum that or like that scale that KRIS was illustrating in his slide, that is also like we're not gonna get to either one of those extremities instantly. It's gonna happen gradually, and the ones who, if such beings exist, which I do perceive that there are people who really do wish to push it more and more towards less freedoms and more towards slavery. If they have patience, they can get there. They can arrive at their goal. It's like that tactic of infiltration instead of like blatantly overtaking an institution or a country. You'll take over you'll do it like gradually. It's like I think it's, I don't know if it actually is related to the Fabian society, but it's, and now I'm getting a bit conspiratorial, but there's this organization called the Fabian Society from 1884 that is all about like how to introduce socialism, or like how to push society in a certain direction, but not by a violent revolution, but through gradual change. And the same goes through for us. And you can take it maybe also at the first we can take it because now I spoke at a societal level. So at a societal level, if we want to create freedom, or if we want to return to freedom, that will be a gradual process, and it will require patience. It's not going to happen instantly. There's not a quick fix. There's no politician that's going to do it for us. There's no tool that's going to do it for us. It's going to require work.
Active patience.
Yeah, I love that, active patience. And you can take it at a, because still that might not seem related to what you were saying with martial arts, but I think I was reminded about it because in martial arts you're developing a skill, and that also requires active patience. It requires that you gradually build up your skills or your body, and the same goes through for healing. There's not like one pill that's gonna give you that thing, like that healing. It's gonna require practice and a healthy practice, right? And that was the point I wanted to interject. I think we'll soon have to end the well, not have to, but I think we're slowly approaching there. I have a point or two I'd like to share, but I can wait. Do you want to say some things, Chris and Juan?
I just want to add to probably the previous question. Even if it were possible to, because that was a question my father were pounded about. It was like, can we get rid of duality, overcome, transmute polarities, and even if it were possible, would it really serve us? I mean, what would be the whole earthly experience be about if that wasn't present anymore? I mean, what choice? I mean, I think that the whole point was to make us have it, to put us in front of choices to make, to grow, for our growth. So, of course, in our personal or individual development, of course, we have to reconcile a lot of things, but still, I mean, in the outer world, in the matrix, or whatever this reality is, this plane of existence, I think it's pretty well. I mean, it's perfect in its sense. So I don't know what question, how the question was intended, or of overcoming polarity or duality or whatever similar words. I mean, what would that look like? And it's just a question. I just I'm done.
I think for me this really does, like it really does. It is a question of, can you escape the law? And you can escape suffering from not understanding the law, and you can recognize when something is presented as law which is not law, and say, oh, that's not truth, that's not law, and you can transcend that. That's not, I don't need to, it doesn't have to be an either or. I can do both, or I can consider both, the thesis and the anyways. So that's why I want to share this this meme here. It's just called Short Lesson on Duality, and it's something that Jaina ESP wrote, I think, back in 2015. So that's 10 years ago, I think. And it says, when it comes to positive/negative duality, we want good, true, and right. So we must know the difference and act. We must polarize and be extreme as to be grounded in moral principle and natural law. So that's, again, we want to choose a polarity. We want to choose one end and polarize there and be like, so that I think for me does say a lot there. So I'll just keep reading it. Then it says, when it comes to gender duality, we want dynamic, balanced interchange and integration. We must learn to use both the mind and the heart, and left analytic and right holistic brain. So do not confuse these types of dualities. The first one is an either or, and the second is and both. And in neither case is good evil or is feminine masculine, law of identity, which is pseudo non-dualism. I don't know if I got that last part. And in neither case is good evil or is feminine. Yeah, that's the thing. Like you'll hear people, well, it's good for you, but it's bad for me. No, it's either or. It can't be both because it's a polarity. And if that's cool with you, that might be our last point. I have one. What's it called? Like, I have an announcement. Is that what it's called? Like, I want to promote the group reading that is gonna happen. Let's say Thursday evening in Europe time. In Europe time. Wait, no, it's not gonna happen Thursday. Sorry, because I have to do something else there. But I can do Friday. So that would be Friday evening here in Europe, and I think that would be maybe Friday morning or Friday midday in the US. So come and read about rhythm. That's why I chose the art of the two boys in the hammock, because they're swinging, right? Whee! We're gonna learn about rhythm, or maybe not. Maybe we're gonna be confused about rhythm, because as KRIS said, this book is a bit. It is written in a manner that can be a bit confusing, and you can easily misinterpret it. So to be honest, for me, a lot of the understanding I've gained of the Hermetic principles has not been from reading the KYBALION, but from hearing other people teach about it and seeing how because they were, I feel like they were more clear in their language. Still, we'll try to give it a go and read the chapter. It's about 12 pages. And if no one else wants to share some thoughts, I'll say thank you for becoming on the roundtable discussion, KRIS and Param.
I was going to bring up before the show started to bring up the polarization between political parties and polarizing people against each other. But you brought it up pretty sufficiently, Oscar. Thanks for hosting the show, and you're doing a really good job.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for hosting, and good job, everybody. Take care. Peace.